Thank you, Cary, for joining us today. I should say not only welcome, but welcome back, because you've been with us really almost from the get-go as we began this series a few years ago. Cary, for those of you who may not know him, is a long time now retired professor at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, a prolific author of many, many important books. His most recent one I'm holding up because I strongly recommend it. It's called Hate Speech and Academic Freedom. There are few people who know as much about the campus scene over many years as Cary Nelson. He's not only been part of that scene, but a student of what's been going on all over the country at universities. He's among the most persistent critics, justifiably so, of some pretty rotten developments on campuses. He knows as much as anybody I'm aware of about what lies behind all of this. Cary, I'll tell you as well, is a former president of the AAUP and currently serves as chair of a group called the Alliance for Academic Freedom. Academic freedom is right smack at the center not only of his work, but of his life. He's been a strong defender of it, but he makes careful discriminations between academic freedom and hate speech, a key aspect, in fact, of the experience of so many of us on campuses these days. For more about that, do get yourself a copy of this book. You'll learn lots from it. I did. And talking about learning more, I'm going to now fall quiet and Cary, turn over to you for your talk for us today.
So thanks so much to both of you, Alvin and Gunter. I was in the process of putting together a website for the group that I and others have formed at the University of Illinois. I was looking through the incredible record of presentations that you folks now have online. It's coming close to 90. It will pass 90 this year, I think. I used to say a few years ago that it was enough to teach a course based on those lectures, assigning one a week, and one would have to say now that it's enough to populate a specialization in contemporary anti-Semitism, a full, a major degree in contemporary anti-Semitism. It's a great resource. Even if you take out my presentations, it's still a great resource. So the topic that I'm addressing today, the future of campus anti-Semitism, is obviously not a cheerful topic. In fact, in the wake of 10/7 and the flood of anti-Semitic responses that really occupied much of the West, not just North America, but Britain, Europe, countries all over the world. It's a really frightening topic in many ways, and an immensely depressing one. To provide you with at least a slight antidote to depression, since I can't medicate you online, what I wanted to do was start off with some examples of things that one can do. At the risk of citing yet another publication, I have co-authored a two-part study with a couple of clinical psychologists who were friends about the identity development of Jewish college students and what threats to it anti-Semitism promotes. And it's a post-10/7 essay, and so it deals with the much increased threats that 10/7 produces. It's a two-part thing. Both of them will be in the Journal of Contemporary Anti-Semitism, and both parts will be open access. It's not behind a paywall. The second part we call Solutions, and it will be out probably at the end of this calendar year, so maybe in December, hopefully, of this year. And it includes a set of principles and practices that can seriously reduce and counter anti-Semitism on campus. The series numbered 24, and so I came up with a couple more so that we could say it was a recommendations A to Z. So we have 26 recommendations. And I'm just going to list a few of them, not all 26, to suggest that we're not impotent in this regard. There are actions that can be taken. Some of those actions are really rather simple. For example, there have been instances of colleges scheduling the first day of classes on Yom Kippur. It doesn't require a major shift in Western ideology to figure out that that's a pretty stupid and, whether unintentionally or not, aggressive action for Jewish students. So one simple thing, your institution agrees to have a representative calendar of major holidays for a variety of faiths, and not to schedule major events on those holidays. And that would include a prohibition against student groups scheduling votes on Zionist issues on holidays, which have happened more than once. So it wouldn't produce an earthquake across the planet to institute a change like that. Another simple change. I mean, there are schools that have a significant Jewish population and either don't provide kosher meals or provide one kosher meal a day. Well, you get a little hungry on one kosher meal. And so schools that provide meals for Muslim students and Jewish students provide 3 meals a day, a regular plan that lets people eat those meals on a regular basis. Again, well, it costs a little money, but people generally have to pay for those meals. So again, those are examples of really very simple things that would make a campus seem a little more welcoming to religiously or Zionistly committed students. There are things that are much harder that are also important. I still believe that the IRA definition, adopting the IRA definition, is the single most important thing that can be done to fight anti-Semitism on campus. However, when I was co-organizing our own Illinois group, which is called Faculty in Favor of Academic Freedom and Against Anti-Semitism, it has 88 members on our Chicago and Illinois campuses so far. We originally put adopt the IRA definition, but we realized, facing reality, that even our Zionist members, our Jewish members certainly, would not all be ready to support the IRA definition. So we wrote, begin a conversation about the utility of adopting the IRA definition, because we know there's going to be a lot of work involved for us to get to that goal. Not so easy, but still important. But there's a place to start. And I'll just say one more thing before launching into the depressing part of this talk. In the wake of the Gaza Solidarity Encampment movement that began in the US, spread to Britain, Europe, and really many other areas worldwide, there were only a few in South America, but there were some. There was one in Mexico. I mean, there were encampments scattered around the world. A lot of campuses have revised their regulations to explicitly prohibit overnight encampments, blocking access to buildings, late night chanting, intimidating Jewish students, and other threatening and disruptive activities. A lot of schools, even the the University of Illinois, which, lost its backbone some 80 years ago, in a kind of hidden fashion, said overnight encampments were unacceptable. Didn't make it very public, but it did make the change. But the important thing is, with all of the schools that have adopted these kinds of policies, the really critical thing is enforcement. I mean, these policies are going to be counterproductive if they are ignored. And that takes some courage, it takes some backbone, it takes some effort to actually enforce these policies and really make it certain that disciplinary procedures and sanctions for proven violators are part of the pattern, and indeed that they do take place. If this sort of stuff continues to happen without any consequences for the perpetrators, then it will just get worse and worse. So I think enforcement is one of the really critical changes that have to take place if anti-Semitism on campuses is really going to be ameliorated. I'm not saying it can be ended, but there need to be competing structures that provide some sense of psychological safety for Jewish students on campus. Intellectual safety is not a project one supports. People are there to be challenged and threatened by arguments, by positions that they're uncomfortable with. But they have to feel that their expressions of their points of view will be tolerated and respected, that they won't be damned or cast out, shunned, because they have beliefs that are contrary to what may prove the loudest or most dominant beliefs on campus. So I'll add one more thing that could be done, which is prohibit any campus group from excluding as members people whose political and religious commitments differ from the group that they're applying for membership for, unless those commitments are in conflict. So if you're running a group to promote climate legislation, then you don't have to accept as a member someone who believes that the climate problems are a hoax. If a person really opposes the mission of the group, you can deny them membership, but not for beliefs that have nothing to do whatsoever with the mission. I don't think it's that difficult for a campus to institute that rule. It just has the courage to do so. Okay, so now on to the future of campus anti-Semitism. Ever since the BDS movement gained power, and it gained power before it had a name, 2001, 2002 is really the point when the boycott and divestment initiatives were triggered in Britain and the US. There have been people who step back and say, this too shall pass. Not to worry, it won't last. And if you've followed the BDS movement as I have, I've been fighting BDS movement since the 2006 to 2007 academic year. I've encountered article after article that announces the BDS movement is dead. And generally they cite several BDS movements that have votes that have failed, and they conclude it's history, it's over with, it has nowhere to go. That despite the fact that in 2014, we really argued strongly in the case against academic boycotts of Israel, that a lot of these debates are not about winning the vote. They're about changing hearts and minds. They're about changing what people feel and believe about Israel. And obviously, if you look at the current history of American politics, you see that those long-term efforts have had a real degree of success. A certain percentage of young people no longer support Israel. People who once might have indeed, in fact, did support it, no longer do. So the winning of hearts and minds has been a battle that we have always partly lost. And the notion that the movement is dead or that campus anti-Zionism will soon pass is a fool's motion. There have been two really substantive, I think really immensely insightful reports to come out in the last month from task forces at Columbia University, at Stanford University. And they've been, I think, very frank about what was happening on campuses and offered very strong warnings about what we had to look forward to. So I'd like to quote one paragraph, short paragraph, from the Columbia University Task Force on Anti-Semitism, and it's by a student. And the quote is, "We're seeing on campus intimidation, active exclusion, assault, conspiracies of blood libel, and media and financial control, historical erasure, and calls for violence. And even as the active discussion of these issues may subside, they will already have started to settle subconsciously as the norm amongst the majority of the non-Jewish student body." In other words, a lot of what we've seen since 10/7 is going to create a new norm on campuses, and the norm will intensify anti-Semitism. And in fact, I would go farther and say that in each of Israel's wars with Hamas, we have seen an increase in the kinds of anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic actions and resolutions in the academy. But in each time we have seen the bar, the baseline of anti-Zionism raised. We've seen the norm get worse with each of those wars. In terms of the activities themselves, accompanying the 2014 war with Hamas, we saw more disciplinary associations pass condemnations and boycott resolutions. That is, national disciplinary associations. We saw that happen in the wake of 2014, and that justified and gave credibility to student and faculty statements on campus. In the midst of the 2021 war, following the 2021 war, gender studies programs led a national campaign to declare Israel an immoral rogue state. That was the first time, I believe, that we saw not just disciplinary statements, but departmental statements opposed to Israel's existence. Departmental statements. That was hugely important because of the impact on campuses. Once you had the intersection of a disciplinary association saying Israel was an immoral rogue state and a department saying Israel was an immoral and rogue state, it gave huge permission to faculty members and students to take those positions, and it gave license for faculty members to teach fundamentally, unrelentingly anti-Zionist courses. If your national discipline says Israel deserves to be eliminated, and your local department says Israel is an apartheid state for which there is no solution, obviously, but elimination, why should you bother trying to teach a balanced course? Why should you bother if you have all the moral and political license you need to make your condemnation of Israel unrelenting? And so there are courses with nothing but anti-Zionist reading assignments week after week after week. And they were given tremendous license by the intersection of disciplinary and departmental statements. Now, of course, in the wake of the continuing 2023-24 war with Hamas, the number of departments issuing anti-Zionist statements, declaring themselves officially anti-Zionist, formally anti-Zionist, has increased. Many more departments have produced statements, and the statements are also more hostile than they were before. It leads me to say that part of the new baseline that we are confronting is a fusion of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. In a lot of my writings in the past, I won't disavow them, but there they are, I raise the question, it's a familiar question, at what point does anti-Zionism cross a line into anti-Semitism? At what point does an anti-Zionist take on the more horrific burden of anti-Semitic advocacy? I think in many ways that question, when does one cross the line, has been erased on campuses, because I think we're encountering a form of what I call anti-Semitic anti-Zionism, a concept that in and of itself combines the two words, anti-Semitic anti-Zionism. I think that is part of our new baseline. It's part of the new normal that I think we're confronting in the midst of this war with Hamas, a war, of course, that we don't know when it will end. It has to end at some point, but we still don't have a date. So I think that's a pretty disturbing consequence of the Gaza solidarity encampments that spread across the world. And of course, part of what that means is that the anti-Semitic import of the chanting and of the slogans that were publicly voiced, sometimes by hundreds of people in the encampments, is that their anti-Semitic implications are inescapable. We still have these silly debates about whether from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is in any ways really anti-Semitic. But in the midst of those encampments, its anti-Semitic impact on students and faculty is inarguable. Many of them feel intensely that the declarations that the encampments have promoted have inescapable anti-Semitic effect. It really doesn't matter what some student in the back of the group actually feels. Maybe there's a student somewhere in the Columbia encampment that actually wanted to see a fair two-state solution. If so, that student had no voice. There were no voices for reconciliation. There were no voices for accommodating both people's national ambitions. It all resolved into the hostile anti-Semitic implications of the slogans that were chanted, that were put on posters, and so forth. And they have helped establish this baseline, which can simply be defined as hatred. It's hatred that I think defines the baseline at the fusion of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. It's hard to believe that it would be possible for that to mean greater warrant for anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic teaching. And yet I think it does. So I think we're going to see in the wake of the war and the campus encampments, we're going to see more purely anti-Zionist courses than we had before. So it's terribly important, not that those courses necessarily be suppressed, although I think some people can be taken out of such courses and reassigned elsewhere. That's an acceptable decision within academic freedom. We need more courses on Jewish history on campus. We need more courses on the conflict in the Middle East that are sympathetic, at least, to Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. That's going to take some work. Not every campus has people who are qualified to teach those courses. But nonetheless, we are an educational enterprise. That's one of the ways that we need to counter anti-Semitism on campus, by having a broader range of courses available, at least that people can take voluntarily to educate themselves better. That's another critical thing we need. One of the consequences of the movement on campus, and it's a consequence that is especially painful for me personally, has been the more aggressive grad employee union anti-Zionism. Shortly after October 7, there were a number of graduate student unions on university campuses, including my own, that sponsored quite vehemently anti-Zionist and I think anti-Semitic public events. Grad student unions giving a forum for anti-Semitic faculty members on their own campus, graduate student unions inviting opponents of Zionism from elsewhere to give talks. The grad employee unions that have turned anti-Zionist have ramped up their activities in the wake of the Gaza solidarity encampments. That means that their impact on the campus as a whole is much nastier than it was before. And it also means something quite specific, which is that its alienating effect on grad student union members who are Zionist has become really critically destructive. Those grad students often feel they have nowhere to turn. They're a specialized constituency. It's not necessarily going to help them to attend a bagel breakfast at the local Hillel. They need involvement in a group that specifically supports their graduate student Zionism, and they generally lack it. And the need for that is incredibly intensified when the very union that is supposed to represent them is proving to be their ideological and religious enemy. That's really a terrible thing. Now, I say that it hurts me personally because I spent 25 years traveling around the country helping graduate student unions to organize, and I never encountered anti-Zionism once in all of those years. Those years ended a couple decades ago, in the last millennium. I never encountered anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism. I was, the NYU grad student union called me up and said, we need you to come and commit an act of civil disobedience and get arrested on our behalf. I went there and got arrested. And now they're a rabidly anti-Zionist local. And that's happened around the country. It's a movement that has gone over into anti-Zionism and sometimes anti-Semitism in the new millennium. And it's one of the developments which is now going a step further in 2023 and 2024. So as a former president of the AAUP, I have to say a little something about their rather unwelcome decision on August 9th to reverse their 20-year-old policy and decide that academic boycotts of universities were just fine. Indeed, now they decided that rather than assaults on academic freedom, academic boycotts were a wonderful expression of your individual right under academic freedom to have your own opinion. And the AAUP position which has been 10 years in the working, is based upon a completely disingenuous and illegitimate form of representation. What the AAUP says is academic boycotts are consist of all the individual decisions that faculty members make to join or not join, to support or not support boycotts, academic boycotts. That's all they are. There are congeries of individual decisions. The AAUP statement basically ignores the actual collective impact of those boycotts, the damage that they do not just to institutions, but to individuals, both here and, of course, in Israel. So they make a false distinction, and they try to convince you that academic boycotts are a wonderful exercise of your individual and political freedom. Well, when a group tries to close down a study abroad program in Israel, that's a little more than an exercise of your individual volition. It's a collective decision, it's a movement activity, and that's fundamental to why we should continue to condemn them. When I say it has a history, I'll take you, one has to go back to the 2015 AAUP decision that statements on social media should be protected from any professional oversight and any personnel decisions. Prior to that, it was quite common. Many AAUP leaders, Matt Finken and Robert Post, take this position in their 2009 book, For the Common Good, about academic freedom, still a very sound book. They say that in areas of social media, you're free to make any statement that you want, and that it shouldn't be subject to any kind of professional academic review, except, they say, when the statements you make on social media match the areas in which you do either teaching or research. So if you're a paleontologist and you say that fossils aren't real, they're imitations put on Earth to test our faith, which is one of the things some people on the Christian right like to say, that's a problem if you're a paleontologist. It calls into question your fitness to do the work of your discipline. So that's an extreme example, but it just highlights the notion that dominated the AAUP, that when you make statements on social media that are part of your areas of teaching and research, people can evaluate them as part of tenure decisions. They can consider those statements when they're making hiring decisions. If you're an anti-Semite or you're a racist on social media, you don't have to hire them. You don't have to give tenure to a racist or an anti-Semite. And it may be that the only evidence of that racism and anti-Semitism is what you do on social media, the separate persona that you create on social media. Well, that should still be a fair topic for personnel decisions, for tenure decisions, for awarding a sabbatical, for awarding research support. All the kind of professional decisions that universities make should be subject to a decision based on your social media presence. The AAUP objects to that, but the AAUP, I think, is wrong and destructive. I will say that when the AAUP first took that position in 2015, we didn't really know how bad or influential social media could be. So I think the people in the AAUP who first made that decision were not dealing with what we now confront on social media. I think Gunter could tell us a little bit about that if he chose to, and indeed he's told us quite a lot about it with his work. The AAUP has nonetheless stayed with that position, and it's reinforced it. The current leadership of AAUP has reinforced it. I think it's a huge error, and I think that no reasonable member of the general public is going to accept the idea that you're a different person on campus than you are on Facebook, that Joe Smith on campus shouldn't be confused with Joe Smith on social media, even if both Joe Smiths have the same social security number. Rational members of the public are going to realize that that categorical distinction on the part of AAUP is nonsensical, and they're not going to tolerate it. And and it's been recommended by an essayist in the Chronicle of Higher Education that radical advocates of white supremacy who do so on social media and who are faculty members need to be protected from sanctions. And I think that's completely crazy. So that's 2015. Let's leap ahead to 2022. No, actually, let's go with 2020. In 2020, the AAUP usually gives an annual Academic Freedom Award to some faculty member who they feel displays exceptional courage and clarity in standing up for academic freedom. In 2020, they gave their national award, and I still have trouble believing this. They gave it to Rabab Abdulhadi, spelled just the way it sounds, a faculty member at San Francisco State University. And in an earlier book, I characterize her as successfully defining every element of her professional life in anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic terms. She teaches anti-Zionist courses. She invites anti-Semitic speakers to campus. She heads an academic department that seems only to hire fierce anti-Zionists. She makes public statements opposing Zionism and hostile to Judaism. She's the complete anti-Zionist faculty member, every aspect of her professional life. And that's the person the AAUP gave its annual award to in 2020. That should have been a warning that something was going wrong with this organization. Then this year, they made Rana Jalil head of Committee A on Academic Freedom and Tenure, the main policy writing body of the AAUP, which astonished me. In my view, she's a committed BDS activist. She's been a committed BDS activist for, I think, about 20 years. She doesn't belong as the head of Committee A, and that's the committee that reversed the AAUP's policy. The new president of AAUP, who became president this year, Todd Wolfson from Rutgers, he isn't just a mere BDS supporter. He's a member of Faculty for Justice in Palestine, a viciously anti-Semitic faculty organization. And he's now president of the AAUP. Last year, I think it was last year, the AAUP created a new group, a new organization called the AAUP Center for Defending Academic Freedom. It appointed Isaac Kamola, the director of that new AAUP Center for Academic Freedom. Again, he's not just a BDS activist, he's another FJP member, an FJP member, head of the Center for Defending Academic Freedom, a group whose attitude toward academic freedom is massively destructive. So some people ask me, by the way, Anita Levy, who's a nice person, I like her well enough. She's a staff member. She's the staff member for Committee A, and she's been an anti-Zionist, certainly for 30 years, for all the time but I've known her, get along with her, but she just does not like the Jewish state. So people ask, is there a chance the AAUP will reverse course? The AAUP will withdraw its change in policy? I don't think so. I don't think when you have a group of BDS and FJP members endorsing academic boycotts, they're going to decide that they were wrong to do so. What has to happen instead, and I think this is another step that we have to take, is to get colleges and universities to renew their opposition to all academic boycotts in principle. A lot of that happened 20 years ago or 15 years ago, but I think in the light of the AAUP's reversal, we have to press colleges and universities to stand by their opposition to all academic boycotts, another practical action that should be taken. Now, I think among the things that we're going to see happening more and more, and I think the AUP's reversal of policy specifically tries to empower this happening, which is many more of what I have called micro boycotts, individual or small group faculty actions against the Jewish state. The AAUP reversal of policy makes it even more easy. It already was helped by the disciplinary statements. It was intensified by the departmental statements against Israel. And now the AAUP's action supporting boycotts, both group boycotts and individual boycotts, is going to mean more of both. We're going to see more boycott resolutions being debated. Some of them will pass. And we're going to see scores and scores of more individual faculty boycott actions. They're going to refuse recommendations for students wanting to study in Israel. They're going to argue against new relationships with Israeli universities, new formal relationships between departments here and departments in Israel, between campuses here and campuses in Israel. They're going to fight to end study abroad programs. They're going to fight to bring a conclusion to research institutes that are shared between Israel and the United States. So another practical recommendation amongst our 26 recommendations is when there is a boycott debate going on your campus, whether the debate wins or fails, one of the best things you can do is to encourage additional relationships with Israeli universities. And that's a great thing that the Business College at the University of Illinois Champaign did when we had a boycott debate, one of many, a couple of years ago. The dean and his executive committee announced they already had good working relationships with Israeli universities. They announced in the midst of this boycott debate, we're going to create more of those relationships. We're going to establish more working relationships with Israeli institutions. That's our response to the damn boycott resolution. So I think that's something, again, that really campuses should be encouraged to take that proactive, productive, supportive of academic freedom response to boycott debates and demands on campus. Create another study abroad program. Create another joint research program on IT. Another program on drip watering. All sorts of research programs. Another climate initiative shared with one or more Israeli universities. I think that's one of the great ways of just saying, make whatever noise you want to make on campus, girls and boys. We're going to go a different direction. So that's another, I think, of the practical things that you should do, even though we're going to see more nastiness, even though we're going to see more aggression against the Jewish state, we can, in fact, respond by doing some positive things. Now, it ain't necessarily going to be easy. I think that the group that Alvin and others have created on the Indiana University campuses can play a positive role here, just as I think the group that we've created at the University of Illinois campuses can play a positive role. But it may take more than that to really resist the anti-Semitic drift of these groups on campus. I think we have to recognize that it's going to take more legal actions, like the Title VI complaints that the Brandeis Group and that Stand With Us have filed. I think we need more of those. They're going to have to be pursued aggressively. They're going to need to be coordinated with the campus groups. I'm not convinced the campus groups can do it on their own. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said that Zionist faculty groups need to consider a certain amount of civil disobedience in support of their demands. But I'm afraid that uncivil disobedience has been commandeered by the BDS movement, and thus that civil disobedience itself, I think for a time, even if it's totally nonviolent and productive, has, I think, been ruined for us. So I don't think that route's going to go. My campus group has done a huge amount of work in writing very detailed recommendations to our administration. You can see them on our website, www.fafaa.net. .org was taken by someone else, so we had to go for net. We have those letters there. The campus administration has welcomed them. They've invited us to consult. Our leaders and members have been to see the campus. We've been to see the university president. They're very gratified for all that we recommend, and they then ignore us. They basically don't do a damn thing that we've recommended. So that's, shall we say, a little disappointing and a little depressing. It's all very cordial. It just doesn't come to anything. And that's part of what leads me to feel that we can't do it on our own. It's going to take coordination both on campus and off campus. I think it's going to take a more consolidated collaboration between the campus, off-campus groups. I think alumni and parents are going to have to play a role. If we're going to want to combat anti-Semitism, and God knows we need to, it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of combined effort and dedication. I think it no longer works to just go off to your study and bury your head in your work. I know how much fun that is. I love the obsessive character of dedicated research, but I think our professional lives are going to require us to combine research and teaching with a certain kind of principled activism on behalf of Jewish students and faculty. And I think we have to go that complex, demanding route down the line. All right. So Gunther said he would mute me if I didn't stop after 50 minutes. So I've honored his threat.